Hi, my name is Cassie Brighter, and this is another episode of Smart Sluts. I'm here with Erika Miley, who is a mental and sexual health therapist. Did I get that right, Erika?
Yes, you nailed it.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for joining me. I was fascinated in watching a couple of the podcasts, well, listening to a couple of podcasts that you did, and then I looked you up a little bit farther. One of the things that I found really interesting is your focus of shame in relation to sexuality. So, should we open with that?
Oh yeah, we can jump right into that. That's a big old hole to fill.
Yes, absolutely. So, to what extent does your work intersect, for example, with the words of Brene Brown?
Ooh, Brene's like the backbone of my perspective. I feel like there are days that I wish she was my mom.
Absolutely.
Brene, come be my mom. I all the time. I feel like I have on a daily basis with my clients talking about how shame has been built from the time they were young, even a lot of times from the time before they were born,
Mhm.
that and how that has shaped their lives, how they see their own sexual health, how they see their own identities, and how shame is this undercurrent that goes through essentially all of
It's almost like nobody's ever thought of this because we touch on some important milestones in bringing a kid up. I'm a mother, I have 3 kids. We touch on, well, for example, we do potty training, and largely we use shame for that. The process of this is dirty and don't touch yourself there and all these concepts. The first period and all that conversation happens a lot around shame. Everything about sex in preteens has a lot to do with don't do this, don't do that. You might catch this, you might catch that. You might suffer these consequences. Very little is focused towards freeing the individual from shame or freeing the individual to have to blossom. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, and like just like the term for the idea of virginity in quotation marks, right? I love that we're trying to shift our language to talk about a sexual debut, so
Oh, I
that
like that a lot. Yeah.
so that we can even talk to kids from the time they're young that yes, this is a rite of passage, and yes, your bodies are your own. And I'm a mom
Oh
as
my
well. I
gosh,
have
this is so funny what you just brought up, because it just occurred to me to frame some of the other rites of passage of teenage years into the concept of losing your virginity. So going to the prom would be losing your nerddom, or
yes.
graduating would be losing your dumbness.
Yes. But I mean, like the entire idea that I mean, as a mom, it's this balance that parents and that everybody out here has got to try to find between like my son who is 7 right now, who
Hmm.
is trying to help him understand that no, you don't need to rub your penis when we're out in public, and that it's something that is safe and healthy for him to do. It's a tricky balance to find as a parent, and it's really really hard when you have been raised in a shame based way. My parents were very evangelical Christians, and I had to go to church camp, and sex was only framed and you can't have that until you get married, and then no other information after that, because
Very
apparently when
little
you
is
get
said about
married,
the fact that most people don't have sex after they get married.
right? Or that you get this magic sexual knowledge when you get married, and like, oh, today you know all the things. It's like,
Yeah, you don't get
Mom,
handed a secret book of
where,
recipes.
where's the book? I want to know.
Grandma's recipes for sex.
Okay, are you ready? You need to do that now.
Oh, that would be so great. I imagine the mock-up
Yeah,
of it
yeah,
already.
yes, I love it. It would be
But
amazing.
to that point, and you mentioned 3 or 4 things that I want to kind of bookmark because I want to get back to, but it reminded me of a couple of really funny moments. One thing I remember is being about 8 years old and walking down the hallway and absent-mindedly scratching an itch.
Hmm.
And my grandfather, who was a religious scholar and a tall, imposing figure, uh, took me aside and said, "We don't touch ourselves there." And I remember at 8 thinking to myself, "Yeah, old man, you don't touch yourself."
Very, very okay boomer of you even back then.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other moment I remember, and I have screwed up a lot of things in parenting, but I've gotten a few
Same.
things right. And this is a moment that I feel I got right, and I really enjoyed myself. So I'm going to be a little smug about it.
I love it.
But I noticed that my son was about 12 at the time, and he was taking longer bathroom breaks. He was getting kind of sullen and morose at the same time. His personality had changed. He was more tense. So I kind of thought back at like what it was like to be 12. So I was
It's a
in the
hard
car with
time.
him. It's a rough time.
It is a hard time. 12 is tough.
My daughter is 13 now, so we're having interesting conversations as well. But so I'm parking the car, and just kind of casually I say to him, "Listen, buddy, I just want you to know, whatever it is that you're doing with your wiener," and you could see his whole body tense up.
Like, oh no.
And I said, "You didn't come up with that. You didn't invent that.
Beautiful.
Your parents and your grandparents and your great grandparents, everybody did this when they're out your age." His mind was blown.
Yes. You normalize the entire experience for him. That's just amazing. That's wonderful. I have a 14-year-old daughter right now, and we started having those conversations when she was 11, 12. Like, hey, this is typical. This is something that I mean, in my family, we had like the don't have sex until you get married conversation, but nobody ever talked to me about masturbation. Nobody ever said anything about like, oh, okay, it's okay to touch your genitalia regardless of its formation. Like you that was just not something that my family talked about. So when I started talking to my children about sexual health and their bodies, I started really early. But we didn't go out the gate and be like, you're 5, we're going to talk about masturbation. Like you go to where the kid is. You educate them best on where they are.
Exactly. And little kids 5, 6, 7 years old start rubbing themselves against the pillow, and you have to be prepared to absorb that and understand that it's just part of human experience. If you start slapping them or spanking them as a result, you're already building that sense of shame. Which brings me to something that you said a little earlier, which is if you were raised in a culture of shame, because quite often what we're carrying, and we don't even know it, is the shame that our parents experience, the shame that our grandparents experience, their thoughts about body weight, their thoughts about body shape, the way that your mother might feel about her stretch marks, and it comes in their language and it trickles down to you.
Yes, that generational, like this is the idea of generational shame, generational trauma. These things are not things that we are born with. These are concepts that we are taught before we are born. I mean, the words even that people will use with those who carry babies. When someone, without your permission, of course, touches your belly and then starts using gendered language with your belly. What on earth is that?
They do that less. They do that less with trans men because they're a little bit more confused about the right protocols. It's kind of funny because it's like pregnancy meets male privilege. So I have a friend who is kind of famous or notorious for being the pregnant man, and his kid is 2 years old now, and he was sharing some of the experiences that he went through, and some of them are just very, very goofy because people's minds start kind of locking. But with women, it's surprising how often somebody will just touch your belly without permission, or here's another thing that I never understood. They'll start telling you some horrible miscarriage stories or something like that.
Yep. I can endorse having experienced that myself. Like just the things that people believe that they have access to you for. And I'm not going to say I know this experience, but when I've talked to some of my trans clients and they've talked about how people ask about their genitalia without any regard to like that you don't have a right to know that information.
Yeah, That's a really peculiar one for me. To what level it's a very casual kind of a thought for people to start discussing my genitals in a conversation. I was renting a room to a sweet girl. I figured that, we'll be sharing a bathroom. I'm going to be candid. I'm going to disclose. I tend to be pretty open with my trans status. And she got really excited and trying to be this quasi ally, kind of supportive, but then started asking me all these very detailed questions about what my genitals are like, what I'm planning to do with them and stuff. And I was like, how about if, for the purposes of renting a room, we don't discuss our crotches so very much?
Beautifully put.
It's just wild. A Lyft driver at one point, I mentioned casually, I'm transgender, and the immediate question was, "Oh, have you had the?" And this is have you had the?
So not only commentary about questioning if you've had surgery or not, but then using a mime of scissors as if that is how the medical procedure is done.
It's just a phrase. Oh, it's absolutely ridiculous, the license that people take with, and it's good to push back. Where I get my lead from, the model I copy, is my Black friend and the way she handles people touching her hair.
What does she do?
She just yells the hell out. She will just reduce them to tears. She'll be like, she'll give them a lesson about intersectional feminism they'll never forget.
I love it. I feel like that. I feel like we need a few more people giving a little bit of like smack, like just a little smack, and we like shock them out of whatever haze they're in that would allow them to even touch someone's hair or ask about someone's body.
Exactly, yeah. This is not my proudest moment, but somebody asked me again about my genitalia, and I said, "Oh, if you don't mind, let me ask you: do you have really long labia, or are they tucked in, or do you have like a hood over the clit, or no?"
Fair question. They put it on the table. It's a fair question now. It's all on the table now. Let's discuss. I'm going to grab my coffee, the handy little mug.
So the subject that you're bringing up, which I think dovetails shame in many ways, is consent, and the fact that we get taught as children quite often, even our mothers get taught with the touching of the belly, how okay it is to cross our boundaries and how we're not supposed to say anything back about it. So to what extent do you think that consent informs shame, or vice versa?
Can I say all of the things? So I have actually my experience in the world of sex therapy and mental health therapy kind of started working with those who have experienced sexual assault, and then I also have worked with perpetrators of sexual assault. So I've worked with the spectrum and of the cycle of abuse, and the thing is that consent abuse and someone understanding like they have a right to someone else, it seems to go hand in hand, and it goes hand in hand with from the time they both, whether it was the person who is the victim of sexual assault or the perpetrator of sexual assault, both more than likely statistically have experienced either abuse in their history, or have experienced domestic violence in their history, or have experienced some sort of other type of trauma in their history. And so the boundary crossing begins so early, as you just alluded to, like whether it was from like early, like the person carrying baby getting touched without permission, or maybe even how that baby got there was maybe I've had several clients that they themselves were the products of a rape, and what does that do to them and their identity, and how do they see now their sexual identities,
and in marriages quite often there was no such thing as consent. It was whenever the man wanted it.
Yes, you signed the marriage license, that means I get access to you whenever I want it. Period. I get access to your body always. I have heard so many different versions of this. regardless of the relationship formation too. So I work with people who are poly. I work with people who are ethically non-monogamous, and
Mhm.
these are things from their histories too, or have happened in their relationships. So we are not one of us is unscathed from the lens of boundary crossing, sexual boundary crossing, and or consent crossing.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I know I'm painting a big picture here, but it is incredibly important to understand like how you understand consent, how you understand other people's boundaries and your own.
Something that I saw that I marveled at is a friend of mine was getting her 2.5, 3-year-old daughter out of the bath and
Mm-hmm.
asked her for permission before she dried her body.
Mm-hmm.
When I inquired about it, because I thought that was noteworthy, she said that she was the victim of sexual assault and that she wanted to make sure that her daughter is inured against that and that she'll never experience something like that. And I thought that was a great lesson.
I think what a beautiful way to teach your children that they have their own physical body agency.
Hmm.
And with my children, both of them, since they were tiny, I ask for hugs, I ask for kisses, and I don't assume that they will allow me to do that, or that, oh, and I do that. I have them do the same with me, because children, they're, you know, there are little monkey creatures, and so they like hang on you and love on you and are attached to you all the time. And so as they get older, teaching them as their mother that I'm teaching them, hey, I don't want to be touched right now, or
Oh, that's a
hey,
good one too. I was thinking always in terms of consulting the consent of the child, but it's a really good idea to also create the framework of you have to check my consent. And I
mm,
like that actually is a big respite for a mother, I think.
yeah, I mean, me and my other parent friends have at various times been bemoaning not wanting to share our food anymore.
Oh yeah. I think that was my first lesson about consent, way before I understood consent in a sexual
Hmm.
context, was my sister we would go anywhere to eat and she would say, "Oh, are you done with that?" And half of my food is already on her plate. So I had to instill a rule, which is like, if you ask me if I want those French fries or not, your fork needs to be on the table, your hands need to be on the table.
Put them where I can see them.
Yes, exactly.
Don't you touch
Oh.
my mac and cheese.
We've opened a few cans of worms, and I wanted to kind of point at a couple of solutions. So, and I realize that you're not going to be able to psychoanalyze the audience in the next 30 seconds.
Come on, let's give it a shot. Okay.
But in terms of generational shame, what string do you pull? Where do you start unpacking and unraveling generational shame? The myths and thoughts, and everybody knows that your mother carried, that your grandmother carried, that now you're supposed to carry, and you got no room in your head for them.
Oftentimes it's in that very, very first appointment. I'm talking with my clients about, how did you find out about sex?
Mm-hmm.
How did you find out about masturbation? How did you find out? How were you disciplined as a kid?
Oh.
So then those questions open up huge doors along family history, along, oh, well, no one told me about sex. And I said, well, who was around you? What caregivers were around you? And they were like,
Mm-hmm.
well, it was just an assumption that we were supposed to know it. And then I learned it later. I talked to my friends. I talked to maybe an older sibling, or the babysitter told me, A, B, and C. So all those kinds of, we in therapy, when we're doing those first intake appointments, it kind of gives us the map of what has happened for that person, how shame has kind of infiltrated their lives, if it was even before they were born, and it then gives us the map of where we need to go.
That is
Like,
a great idea. And one thing that occurred to me is that we talk a lot about sexual shame in terms of the things that are said to us.
mhm.
And it just occurred to me that an aspect of this also is all the things that are not said to us, because
Yes.
our parents have taken the trouble to teach us how to brush our teeth and how to eat our food. And we know what the car does, and we understand the way mowing the lawn works. And there's all these things that are transparently explained to us. But there's this vast universe which we know is there, but we're not supposed to know anything about, and that's gotta have something to do with shame.
Absolutely. I there's so many people that I have talked to throughout my life, clients, friends, family, who have said, "Oh yeah, Aunt so and so did this. Uh Person so and so, yeah, went away for a while because they had a mental health problem, but they didn't
Mm-hmm.
identify it as a mental health problem. They just went away for a while."
Mm-hmm.
Or oh, so and so got pregnant when they were 15 and we stopped seeing them. We didn't see them again until our senior year of high school.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
What, like, all of those kinds of things are like those kind of revealing things that people hear throughout their lives. And it is these hidden family secrets that are not secrets that everybody has a sense of. And then there, all of us, because this is what our brains are made to do, fill in the gaps with what we think happened. And now from ancestry.com and all of those, we're starting to see how people's lineages are. They actually, I think this is, I promise it, this is related. They've actually opened some call centers specifically for talking to people about the emotional, like, trauma of finding out you had a sibling you didn't know about, or a cousin you
Oh.
didn't know about, or and it was the family secret and no one has talked about it.
That's amazing. Yeah, I remember situations like that in my childhood as well. These things that you realize there was a thing there, but nobody's talking about it. And we talked about consent and shame connected. And you mentioned something that I want to connect with shame as well, which is the subject of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So when you experience trauma in something as visible and tangible as a bicycle accident, you can come to your mother with a skinned knee or with a bleeding knee, and you can say the things and you can get the care, but you wouldn't be able to do that quite as easily. Most people wouldn't be able to do that quite as easily with something like first sexual experience, first sexual exploration as a child, or sexual molestation by somebody, or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So trauma with shame becomes explosive in itself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I have talked to hundreds of people about their, either they will describe it as their first sexual experience, and they don't necessarily attach abuse to that label because at least their brain understood that experience as something pleasurable.
Well, that's
Or
a matter of the power dynamic, right? If it's an 8-year-old exploring with another 8-year-old, then you would assume that they both have pretty much the same level of agency. If it's an 8-year-old with a 40-year-old, it's a very different story.
absolutely. And helping people understand, like, oh, that did impact you in a way, or did shape in some way how you see what has happened to your body, or how you see maybe your own sexual pleasure, or whatever the person who experienced this event, however they see it, whatever map they have built. For me, like the clinician who's trying to help them kind of understand the narrative of abuse, or the narrative of trauma, and how it impacts their entire lives, because it is different for every single one of us. It's difficult to say, like, oh, okay, trauma impacts humans this way. It's different for every person who's experienced it.
In your experience with clients, are they generally pretty cognizant of the trauma they carry, or is it something that's obvious to you and not obvious to them?
I wish there was a concrete answer here, and in good therapist fashion, I'm going to say it depends. It really does. Like, I have people who come to me who have a very good sense, like, no, this thing happened to me, I did not like it, this harmed me, and I got to go, not got to, like they were excited about it, but did go through like the justice system, and at least can see that they got justice against the person who perpetrated the abuse against them, all the way to people who it is a secret to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And how that impacts them to hold that. So it really, really depends on the person. It depends on the kind of journey that they got to go through, whether their family was open about it, which most of the time they're not. I mean, even in my own experience, I don't have a problem talking about my own trauma, like having been harmed by a family member when I was very little and knowing that it was not okay.
It's
And
shocking
telling
how common those stories are. It's really shocking.
absolutely. And then having no one do anything about it, I just knew that I needed to stay away from that grandparent.
Mm-hmm.
And so that left me, the little 5-year-old, to figure that out. Right. And
Yeah.
so that story, that my story, I know is mine, but is also incredibly common. Most people who've experienced some sort of assault or trauma, or it has happened at the hands of someone they know.
And do you find that your clients have generally been able to talk about this with their spouses or partners, or is it something that they carry deep inside in secret and only tell you in session?
I have to say that a majority of the people that I've worked with, they have eventually told their partner or spouse or spouses or partners. They have eventually shared that. Sometimes that conversation needs to be guided by someone like myself,
Mm-hmm.
or they took several years maybe into their relationship to tell them. Every person has been a little different, but there is reticence in the beginning to
Mm-hmm.
share that deep dark, what they feel is these deep dark secrets. And
Yeah. We don't want to
sometimes
say that we're broken, right? We don't want to say that we're damaged
exactly, like,
goods.
or be perceived that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I see across the board a variability, but I do see a majority of people wanting to keep this to themselves, and rightfully so. This is their narrative. They get to tell it when they're ready.
And I think that I should clarify because you rectified it. I was being sarcastic, but my sarcasm doesn't always come through. So yes, absolutely. We are not broken and we're not damaged goods. When somebody
Yes.
else took license with their bodies or did something untoward toward us, but it's often that we think about it that way. So that's why I said
Yes.
that. But
Yeah.
it's and that's, by the way, this brings me back to shame. For me, I'm pretty shameless. And I didn't used to be, of course. And I had a particular cathartic experience, which cisgender people usually won't have, which is I had to come face to face with my own mortality. I had to come face to face with life or death decisions. I had to
Mm,
decide whether or not I was going to live or die. And
mm,
when I decided that I was going to transition, with it, I burnt down any semblance of pretense because I had built a life out of pretending and out of keeping a persona and out of keeping uh, um, a presentable, respectable image of myself 3 feet in front of me that people will interact with, but I
mm-hmm.
would never show them shameful me. And
Yeah.
I blew that up, and now I'm kind of an open book. But I think that most people tend to live most of their lives inside of this kind of like, I'm just going to show you my Instagram persona.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Like, it's too difficult. Like, to kind of like bring Brene Brown right back into this conversation of like that the connection that we so deeply, deeply want. We keep people at a distance and don't allow them to truly connect to us
Mm-hmm.
because of fear of that rejection, abandonment, or if you truly seen me, then you won't like what you see. That's all of my work in a day in a nutshell that I'm working with people. So yes.
That's worth repeating. If you truly see me, then you won't like what you see. I think that so many people live there and so many
Mm.
people build their whole castle around that. And then, of course, they're not going to enjoy sex. They're not going to enjoy love because they're wearing all this armor.
Yes, and you're so worried about the armor. You're so worried about how whether each piece of that armor is securely intact, as opposed to actually connecting with your own body, connecting with
Mm-hmm.
pleasure, connecting with oh, maybe even the pleasure of your partner.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was thinking in terms of the systems that facilitate overcoming that shame and the ones that don't. And it got me thinking about the medical profession
Mm.
and how they quite often lack in bedside manner, lack in
Yes.
sensitivity, and
Yes.
monumentally lack in sex positivity and sexual awareness.
Woo! yeah. Oh yes. I mean, the average, and I say this, I'm going to say this because I'm not going to sit here and be like, wag my finger. Medical professionals do better. No, I fundamentally think that this isn't your fault. And I include myself as a medical professional. When you work in mental health, you're part of that field. You're part of, if those of you who are ARNPs, those of you who are psychologists, those of you who are psychiatrists, medical doctors, whatever you do in the helping field, like, this isn't your fault. Grad school failed you. I mean, we could go way back and say elementary school failed you. Sex education in the US sucks some serious ass.
And it's worth mentioning also that I especially encounter this in terms of the awareness of the gender spectrum and conversations around gender.
Yes.
Practitioners went to grad school 20, 25 years ago, which was, prehistory.
Yes. They didn't even know what the whole, they didn't understand that our genitalia, that are essentially the same parts, just in different configurations. That was not something that they learned in medical
Diagrams
school.
didn't have the clitoral gland in it.
No, it was missing the entire clitoris, y'all.
Little detail omitted.
Well, I mean, it's from most of the medical field overall is not from a pleasure basis. It's not from a prevention basis. It is a response to crisis, right? And
oh, wow.
I know so many doctors, I know so many psychologists, I know so many people who got into the fields to be helpers. So I believe people want more information. They want to do better. They want to know better. So many of my folks, regardless of how they identify, have encountered either fat shaming or misgendering, using their dead name, like what have you. And we as a field need to do better, and we can do better. So I just started this, I've been working on this summit called Shit You Didn't Learn in Grad School. It's this coming. So for those of you who are going to be tuning in, it's March 20th through the 22nd, 2020. And this is going to be at least a yearly, if not bi-yearly summit, to help fill in the gaps that grad school just really didn't help with, or medical school. Whatever type of after college schooling y'all went to, it missed the mark. And it didn't prepare you for how your clients and patients' sexual stories would impact you and your own sex life, let alone how to communicate with your clients and patients well. And we've got some really cool folks who are gonna, like, business building, like how to run a private practice, like how to run a medical practice, how to take, if you are a person who wants to have a baby, how to take a maternity or paternity leave when you own your own business and or have your own practice. We're going to talk about all of the things. It's going to be really, really great.
Yeah, because when you're a practitioner, you are also basically running your own business, and that's not something that gets touched on a lot during therapist school.
No, I mean, I'll speak for my own program. There was one sexual health course, which was terrible, one, and two, it also, a majority of the discomfort in the room led. So there were so many people in the room who were so uncomfortable. It was difficult for even the professor to be able to get through a lot of the material they needed to get through, because there were so many people who were so uncomfortable with the material.
Oh my God.
One of my favorite mentors and practitioners is Dr. Doug Brown-Harvey. And he talks about the person who's the most uncomfortable in the room leads to discussion. Also, like, the discomfort then becomes the focus, as opposed to helping the person understand how pleasure could look for their clients, or how pleasure could look for them. Then the discomfort then becomes the focus and the primary focus. And then
it always boggles my mind that graduate students might have this kind of a disconnect with the material.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were just talking about shame and sex, right? Like it didn't go away when we got our master's degrees. Like it just continued right along trucking down that road.
Hmm.
And most of the time, it's when you start having conversations about sexual health with people, that is when that shame is going to surface because of that cultural narrative that has been going on for so long, or longer than any of us have been alive, that it's really, really hard bias to nail down inside yourself when it happens.
Absolutely. We touched on some things that I want to kind of resurface. This idea that if you really saw me, you wouldn't like what you saw, I think is at the heart of a lot of the challenges in relationships, a lot of the challenges that we have even getting into relationships or becoming vulnerable with people. So I wanted to provide a couple of resources, and I definitely would encourage everybody to read the works of Brené Brown. But can you think of anything else that we should share with the viewers?
Whew. So, so many. And
Come as you
I'll give
are is the one I'm thinking about.
Dr. Emily Nagoski is probably one of my favorites. She's been on my show, Sex Talk with Erika Miley. She is just a wonderful human being. And when it comes to shame and sexuality, I would say Dr. Justin Lee Miller's book, Tell Me What You Want. It's all about the science around our sexual fantasies. And it breaks down shame in the way of, hey, look, a lot of us are actually fantasizing about very similar themes, and they're much more common than you think they are. And that is a phenomenal book. And then I also encourage people to check out some wonderful media. I'll shamelessly plug my podcast, which is Sex Talk with Erika Miley. So I interview people from all over the sexuality
I
field,
recommend it. Really good stuff.
and it has a catchy jingle that you won't get out of your head. I promise you. But that being said, I also I love Sex Positive Families. That is a really, really good resource. They have a Facebook page, they have an Instagram account, they have a website so that you can feel confident in being able to talk to your children or your families about sexuality, or if you need really good sex education. O School is one of my favorite things that I refer to many people because they have wonderful sex education videos. And regardless of however you identify, regardless of what you're into, the educational pieces of O School is just fantastic. Tristan Taormino's work. I love Tristan Taormino so very much.
I was
And
on a panel with her, and I have Pucker up on my shelves.
yes, Tristan's amazing. So there are so many of us out here that really want to get the education out into the world. Oh, my girl, Deandra Blylock Johnson, she's awesome, especially if you're a person of faith. She does Ask a Sex Therapist, but she's also the Christian sex maven. So she is an ASEX certified sex therapist, woman of color, who really, really encourages people who are in the faith communities to really be more sex positive, bring in everybody, and teach them a not a shame-based curriculum of sex,
Oh,
and that
that's good stuff.
that we're meant for pleasure. She's really, really awesome. She's got a great Instagram. And then I'm just I'll definitely send you some stuff and send you an email, and I have the stuff in my head.
Yeah, but those are really good ones to share. And then if we can mention one more time, shit that you didn't learn in grad school. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did. Beautiful.
When is that?
That is March 20th through the 22nd. All online, people. You do not have to leave your house. And all the replays will be free, and you'll be able to watch it even if you can't be there live. And so if you are a psychologist, an RNP, a therapist, a sex educator, a health coach, regardless of what your field is, if you need more information, you feel like your education really didn't get to the bottom of what you need, that's what this is for.
That's terrific. Thanks so much for being with us. And what would be like if you have one nugget of wisdom that you want to leave with our viewers before we go, Erika?
and all of my clients, if they ever hear this, they'll roll their eyes and laugh. Find some sort of meditative practice and do it. And I don't care what kind of meditation it is. It can be guided. It could be walking meditations. I don't care what it is, especially during this time. Like we're recording when we're all in, various levels of quarantine for the coronavirus. Like anxiety is high right now. And a really, really good way to tackle that inner physiological discomfort of anxiety and fear and shame is learning how to empty your own cup by using some sort of meditation.
That's very, very useful. Thanks so much, Erika. We could talk forever, but
Yes.
we have to wrap this up. So this has been a conversation about sex and about all the things with Erika Miley, mental and sexual health therapist. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.